All right, let's dive in. Today we're tackling a book that's become a bit of a cultural phenomenon. Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death. You've probably heard the title even if you haven't had the chance to read the book itself. But we're going deeper than just the catchy phrase. We're exploring Postman's core argument. How our shift from a world dominated by the printed word to one obsessed with television has fundamentally changed how we think, communicate, and even, do politics.
It's interesting because Postman's work was published back in the 80s, but it feels so relevant today, even more so in our age of social media and the 24/7 news cycle. It's like he was predicting where we'd end up. He wasn't just talking about literal television, was he? He was talking about a culture where entertainment is king, often at the expense of substance.
And that's why we're doing this deep dive, to unpack how this amusing ourselves to death thing impacts everything, from how we consume news to how we practice religion, even how we learn. It might make you look at your phone a little differently.
Yeah, I think so. Postman wasn't anti-entertainment, but he was definitely wary of its power, especially its unchecked power. He argued that when entertainment becomes the dominant mode of communication, it can seep into areas of life that require serious thought and engagement, like politics, for example.
Oh, for sure. Politics. Remember when political satire was just, satire? Postman used Saturday Night Live to illustrate this point. He noticed that at some point, SNL went from simply commenting on politics to actually influencing it.
It's like the lines got blurred. Political commentary started to look a lot like political reality, like when George H.W. Bush invited Dana Carvey, his SNL impersonator, to the White House. That was interesting. It makes you wonder, is this politics or is this show business? Where does one end and the other begin?
And it feels like it's just exploded since then. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
How much of today's political landscape is shaped by things going viral or sound bites or how entertaining a politician is? Makes you think, are we focused on the show or are we focused on actual substance?
It's a big question. Are we so caught up in the performance that we're missing the policies and what they mean? And that leads us right into Postman's next point, how news has become entertainment.
Yeah, that feeling of scrolling through endless headlines. It's like you're bombarded with information, but you're not actually understanding anything.
Exactly. Postman quotes the executive editor of the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour, who talked about how news presentation had become obsessed with being brief, with constant stimulation, but the depth, the context, that often gets lost.
It's like we're on a treadmill of information, but we're not really getting anywhere, are we? And then you have the ads. They blend right into the news programs. It's like, wait a minute, am I watching the news or I'm watching a commercial? It's so subtle, it blurs the line even more between information and entertainment. Are we even able to tell the difference anymore?
That blurring, that was exactly what worried Postman. When news becomes just another form of entertainment, it's hard to separate fact from fiction, bias from objectivity. It's a real challenge if you're trying to be an informed citizen.
Now, this one might seem a little unexpected. Religion and entertainment. I have to admit, I wouldn't have connected the two right away. But Postman makes a really interesting argument here.
He contrasts the historical, very solemn nature of religious practices with how television is used today for preaching. Like, picture this, the quiet reverence of an ancient cathedral. Then compare that to, say, a televangelist with flashy graphics and a studio audience. It does make you wonder if something is lost.
It's like two totally different experiences. You have the sense of awe and contemplation in one, and then you have this almost performative aspect in the other. Does the medium itself change the message? Is that possible?
That's the question, right? Can a medium made for entertainment really convey the depth and the sacredness of religious teachings? Or is it turning a spiritual experience into just another thing we consume, something to watch?
That's deep. Now, this last one might sound appealing at first. Education through entertainment. Who doesn't love learning that's fun and engaging? But Postman wants us to think a little deeper about this, too.
He gets that using things like TV quiz shows or educational games to make learning more appealing is attractive. But he also uses examples like Japan's Heisei education reforms. They tried to make school fun by cutting class time and using more digital programs.
And what happened?
It backfired. Big time.
Wow.
It's interesting, even a technologically advanced nation like Japan found that going to digital actually made student performance worse. They had to go back to more traditional ways of learning. More books, more time in the classroom.
So we've seen how this whole amusing ourselves to death idea plays out in these different areas of life. But the big question is, why? Why is this shift toward entertainment happening? Why is it the default?
Well, Postman points to a couple of key factors. One is just the sheer volume of information we're dealing with today. He talks about how different things were before the telegraph. Back then, information traveled at the speed of, well, horses and ships, basically. And then suddenly, bam, it's the age of instant communication.
He even quotes Thoreau, which is amazing. Thoreau was already worried about this back in the 1800s. He said, "We are in great haste to construct a magnetic telegraph from Maine to Texas. But Maine and Texas, it may be, have nothing important to communicate." It's crazy how relevant that is today.
It really is. Think about it. How much information do you actually take in on any given day? From news to social media to just, I don't know, random things you stumble across online. How much of it is actually important or even relevant to your life?
It's overwhelming, to be honest. I think that's part of what Postman was getting at. When we're constantly drowning in information, we tend to gravitate towards the stuff that doesn't require us to think too hard, the stuff that just kind of washes over us. It's easier.
It makes sense. And that leads us to Postman's second point, maybe one of his most famous ideas. The medium is the metaphor. This is where things get pretty deep.
So he's saying that how we get information, like the actual form of media, changes how we think. So like reading a book is different than, say, watching a TikTok video.
Exactly. He contrasts the linear, in-depth thinking you get from reading with the fragmented, image-driven experience of, television. He even suggests that all the quick cuts and flashy visuals of TV might have actually changed the way we read, maybe made us less patient with complex text, drawn to those quick hits of information.
And it's like, give me the bullet points, right? Don't make me work too hard.
Right. So we've looked at how entertainment has kind of snuck into all these serious aspects of our lives and why that might be happening. But what does it mean? What are the consequences when a society prioritizes amusement above everything else? What happens then?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? That's where the title, Amusing Ourselves to Death, really hits home. Postman argues that one of the biggest consequences is this imbalance between information and action. He calls it a disproportionate information-action ratio.
Okay, break that down for me. Disproportionate information-action ratio. It sounds a bit complicated. Think of it this way. In the past, you learned something. You were more likely to do something with that knowledge. You read a book about gardening. You planted a garden. You saw a problem in your community. You organized to fix it. There was a clear link between information and action.
But now it's like we're constantly bombarded with information about all these problems in the world, but we feel like there's nothing we can do about them. It's almost paralyzing.
Exactly. And there's that line from Coleridge, water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink. It captures that feeling so well. We have all this information, but we can't seem to do anything with it. It can even lead to apathy, a sense of hopelessness.
Like, what's the point of even knowing about all these problems if I can't actually solve them? It's a bit depressing. And I think it connects to something else Postman talks about, right? Our addiction to fragmented information.
Definitely. He was especially concerned about how young people were getting used to this, getting their information in these little bursts, scrolling through headlines, sound bites, rather than taking the time to read longer articles or, books, the kind of deep reading that requires focus and patience.
It's like our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter, and we're losing the ability or maybe even the desire to really dive into complex topics. We want the quick and easy version.
He makes this fascinating comparison to 19th century America. Back then, figures like Lincoln and Edison, they were known for being voracious readers. They spent hours every day reading books, seeking out knowledge. It was a whole different culture of learning, one that valued depth and intellectual curiosity.
And what's Postman saying? That the way we consume information now in these tiny bites, always being interrupted by notifications and everything, that it's actually changing how we think, making it harder to think critically, to really think deeply about things.
It's possible, almost as if our brains are being rewired, to crave constant stimulation rather than, sustained focus. And that's concerning, not just for our ability to solve complex problems, but also for our capacity to empathize, to truly understand different viewpoints.
That makes sense. So to recap, we've explored Postman's argument, how entertainment has crept into all these areas of our lives, why that might be happening, and some of the potential downsides. But what does it mean for us now, in a world that's even more saturated with entertainment than the one Postman was writing about back in the 80s?
That's the big question, isn't it? And it's one that Postman himself grapples with. Towards the end of the book, he draws this rather unsettling comparison between our world and the dystopian future in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World.
Oh, wow. Okay, remind me about Brave New World. High school English was a while ago.
Well, in Huxley's vision, people are kept happy and compliant, through constant amusement. They get everything they want, but they've lost something crucial, their ability to think deeply, to experience genuine emotion. They've lost their sense of meaning and purpose beyond just, instant gratification. They're basically happy slaves, living in a world that's completely superficial, no real connection, no depth.
It's like they've traded their freedom to think for a life of endless distractions.
Exactly. And Postman asks this very haunting question. Are we headed in the same direction? Are we becoming so amused, so distracted, that we forget how to think critically, to really engage with the world around us, to even feel things deeply?
It's a scary thought. Is it inevitable, though? Are we doomed to amuse ourselves to death?
I don't think so, not necessarily. I think Postman was trying to warn us, not predict the future. It's more like a wake-up call than a prophecy. He wasn't saying, throw out your TVs, get rid of your smartphones, everyone become a hermit. Was he? No, definitely not. He understood that entertainment has its place. It's about balance, isn't it? Recognizing the impact entertainment has on us and making sure it doesn't completely take over the parts of our lives that need critical thinking and real connection. A sense of purpose.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we navigate a world where entertainment is literally everywhere you look, constantly fighting for our attention?
Well, Postman has some practical advice. He talks about media literacy, which basically means understanding how different forms of media work, being aware of their biases, their agendas, and not just passively consuming information, but questioning it, thinking critically.
So it's not just about cutting down on screen time, right? It's about being more intentional with what you're taking in and why. Almost like choosing a healthy diet for your mind.
I like that analogy, a healthy media diet. And like a healthy diet, it should be diverse. Don't just get stuck in your own echo chamber. Seek out different viewpoints, even ones you might disagree with.
That makes sense. So media literacy is important. What else can we do?
Postman was also a big advocate for cultivating habits of deep reading and focused thinking. In a world of instant gratification and constant distractions, it's easy to lose that ability to concentrate for extended periods. But that ability is so important for real learning, for critical analysis.
It's like a mental muscle you have to keep working out. The more you exercise that muscle, the easier it is to resist distractions and really engage with those big, complex ideas. But is that even possible these days? I mean, everything is designed to keep us scrolling, to grab our attention.
It takes effort, for sure, but I think it's worth it. Make time for reading, for reflecting, for conversations that go beyond the surface level. Put your phone away for a bit, turn off the notifications, allow yourself to get lost in a book or a thought-provoking conversation. You might be surprised at what happens.
Yeah, it's like pressing pause on the constant stream of entertainment and giving your mind some space to breathe, to think, to really connect the dots.
Exactly. And when you do that, you start to really engage with the information you're taking in, question it, make it your own. And that's when real learning happens. That's when things change.
So media literacy, deep reading, focused thinking, anything else we can do to avoid amusing ourselves to death.
I think Postman would also emphasize the importance of public discourse. Actually having conversations about the things that matter, listening to perspectives that are different from yours, even ones you might not agree with. And don't be afraid to speak up. Share your own opinions. Be part of the conversation.
So it's not just about sitting back and being entertained, right? It's about being involved, being an active participant in the world, not just passively watching it go by.
Exactly. That's what Postman was urging us to do, to reclaim our agency, to be informed and engaged citizens, people who aren't just amused by the world, but actively trying to make it a better place.
That's a good point. I think as we wrap up this deep dive into amusing ourselves to death, I keep coming back to one of Postman's most powerful quotes. What afflicted the people was not that they were laughing instead of thinking, but that they did not know what they were laughing about and why they had stopped thinking.
It's a chilling reminder that the real danger isn't entertainment itself. It's about losing the ability to think for ourselves, to decide what's truly worth paying attention to engage with the world in a meaningful way.
So, as you go out into the world today, dear listeners, I'd like to challenge you to remember Postman's message. Be mindful of how you're consuming entertainment. Make time for deep thinking and critical engagement. And never, ever forget how important it is to be an active, informed citizen. Don't just be amused, be informed. Be challenged. Be the change.
Nicely put. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it sparked some reflection, some questioning, and maybe even inspired you to take action.
Until next time, keep diving, keep thinking, and keep engaging with the world in all its complexity and wonder.